if I may make the remark." Roland had hardly ever been so startled in his life. In the first place, he was not aware of having uttered his thoughts aloud. In the second, he had imagined that he was alone in the room, and so, a moment before, he had been. But the owner of the voice possessed, among other qualities, the cat-like faculty of entering a room perfectly noiselessly, a fact which had won for him, in the course of a long career in the service of the best families, the flattering position of star witness in a number of England's raciest divorce cases. Mr. Teal, the butler, for it was no less a celebrity who had broken in on Roland's reverie, was a long, thin man of somewhat priestly cast of countenance. He lacked that air of reproving hauteur which many butlers possess, and it was for this reason that Roland had felt drawn to him during the black days of his stay at Evenwood Towers. Teal had been uncommonly nice to him on the whole. He had seemed to Roland, stricken by interviews with his host and Lady Kimbuck, the only human thing in the place. He liked Teal. On the other hand, Teal was certainly taking a liberty. He could, if he so pleased, tell Teal to go to the deuce. Technically, he had the right to freeze Teal with a look. He did neither of these things. He was feeling very lonely and very forlorn in a strange and depressing world, and Teal's voice and manner were soothing. "Hearing you speak, and seeing nobody else in the room," went on the butler, "I thought for a moment that you were addressing me." This was not true, and Roland knew that it was not true. Instinct told him that Teal knew that he knew that it was not true, but he did not press the point. "What do you mean? You think I'm quite right?" he said. "You don't know what I was thinking about." Teal smiled indulgently. "On the contrary, sir, a child could have guessed it. You have just come to the decision, in my opinion a thoroughly sensible one, that your engagement to her ladyship can not be allowed to go on. You are quite right, sir. It won't do." Personal magnetism covers a multitude of sins. Roland was perfectly well aware that he ought not to be standing here chatting over his and Lady Eva's intimate affairs with a butler, but such was Teal's magnetism that he was quite unable to do the right thing and tell him to mind his own business. "Teal, you forget yourself," would have covered the situation. Roland, however, was physically incapable of saying, "Teal, you forget yourself." The bird knows all the time that he ought not to stand talking to the snake, but he is incapable of ending the conversation. Roland was conscious of a momentary wish that he was the sort of man who could tell butlers that they forgot themselves. But then that sort of man would never have been in this sort of trouble. The "Teal, you forget yourself" type of a man would be a first-class shot, a plus golfer, and would certainly consider himself extremely lucky to be engaged to Lady Eva. "The question is," went on Mr. Teal, "how are we to break it off?" Roland felt that, as he had sinned against all the decencies in allowing the butler to discuss his affairs with him, he might just as well go the whole hog and allow the discussion to run its course. And it was an undeniable relief to talk about the infernal thing to someone. He nodded gloomily and committed himself. Teal resumed his remarks with the gusto of a fellow conspirator. "It's not an easy thing to do gracefully, sir. Believe me, it isn't. And it's got to be done gracefully, or not at all. You can't go to her ladyship and say, 'It's all off, and so am I,' and catch the next train for London. The rupture must be of her ladyship's making. If, in fact, some disgraceful information concerning you were to come to her ladyship's ears, that would be a simple way out of the difficulty." He eyed Roland meditatively. "If, for instance, you had ever been in jail, sir? But I haven't. No offence intended, sir, I'm sure. I merely remembered that you had made a great deal of money very quickly. My experience of gentlemen who have made a great deal of money very quickly is that they have generally done their bit of time. But, of course, if you let me think. Do you drink, sir?" "No." Mr. Teal sighed. Roland could not help feeling that he was disappointing the old man a good deal. "You do not, I suppose, chance to have a past?" asked Mr. Teal, not very hopefully. "I use the word in its technical sense. A deserted wife, some poor creature you have treated shamefully?" At the risk of sinking still further in the butler's esteem, Roland was compelled to answer in the negative. "I was afraid not," said Mr. Teal, shaking his head. Thinking it all over yesterday, I said to myself, I'm afraid he wouldn't have one. You don't look like the sort of gentleman who had done much with his time." "Thinking it over?" "Not on your account, sir," explained Mr. Teal. "On the family's. I disapproved of this match from the first. A man who has served a family for as long as I have had the honour of serving his lordship's comes to entertain a high regard for the family prestige. And, with no offence to yourself, sir, this would not have done." "Well, it looks as if it would have to do," said Roland gloomily. "I can't see any way out of it." "I can, sir. My niece at Aldershot." Mr. Teal wagged his head at him with a kind of priestly archness. "You can not have forgotten my niece at Aldershot?" Roland stared at him dumbly. It was like a line out of a melodrama. He feared, first for his own, and then for the butler's sanity. The latter was smiling gently, as one who sees light in a difficult situation. "I've never been at Aldershot in my life." "For our purposes you have, sir. But I'm afraid I'm puzzling you. Let me explain. I've got a niece over at Aldershot who isn't much good. She's not very particular. I'm sure she would do it for a consideration." "Do what?" "Be your past, sir. I don't mind telling you that as a past she's had some experience. She looks the part, too. She's a barmaid, and you would guess it the first time you saw her. Dyed yellow hair, sir," he went on with enthusiasm, "done all frizzy. Just the sort of young person that a young gentleman like yourself would have had a past with. You couldn't find a better if you tried for a 12-month." "But I say!" "I suppose 100 wouldn't hurt you?" "Well, no, I suppose not, but—" "Then put the whole thing in my hands, sir. I'll ask leave off to morrow and pop over and see her. I'll arrange for her to come here on the day after to see you. Leave it all to me. To night you must write the letters." "Letters?" "Naturally there would be letters, sir. It is an inseparable feature of these cases." "Do you mean that I've got to write to her? But I shouldn't know what to say. I've never seen her." "That will be quite all right, sir, if you place yourself in my hands. I will come to your room after everybody's gone to bed and help you write those letters. You have some note paper with your own address on it? Then it will all be perfectly simple." When, some hours later, he read over the 10 or 12 exceedingly passionate epistles which, with the butler's assistance, he had succeeded in writing to Miss Maud Chilvers, Roland came to the conclusion that there must have been a time when Mr. Teal was a good deal less respectable than he appeared to be at present. Byronic was the only adjective applicable to his collaborator's style of amatory composition. In every letter there were passages against which Roland had felt compelled to make a modest protest. "1,000 kisses on your lovely rosebud of a mouth." "Don't you think that's a little too warmly coloured?" And "I am languishing for the pressure of your ivory arms about my neck and the sweep of your silken hair against my cheek. What I mean is, well, what about it, you know?" "The phrases," said Mr. Teal, not without a touch of displeasure, "to which you take exception are taken bodily from correspondence which I happen to have the advantage of perusing, addressed by the late Lord Evenwood to Animalcula, Queen of the High Wire at Astley's Circus." His lordship, I may add, was considered an authority in these matters. Roland criticized no more. He handed over the letters, which, at Mr. Teal's direction, he had headed with various dates, covering roughly a period of about 2 months antecedent to his arrival at the Towers. "That," Mr. Teal explained, "will make your conduct definitely unpardonable. With this woman's kisses hot upon your lips," Mr. Teal was still slightly aglow with the fire of inspiration, "you have the effrontery to come here and offer yourself to her ladyship." With Roland's timid suggestion that it was perhaps a mistake to overdo the atmosphere, the butler found himself unable to agree. "You can't make yourself out too bad. If you don't pitch it hot and strong, her ladyship might quite likely forgive you. Then where would you be?" Miss Maud Chilvers of Aldershot burst into Roland's life like one of the shells of her native heath 2 days later at about 5 in the afternoon. It was an entrance of which any stage manager might have been proud of having arranged. The lighting, the grouping, the lead up were all perfect. The family had just finished tea in the long drawing room.